Were you the scapegoat when you were being raised? And have you found that once a scapegoat, always a scapegoat? And now you're in relationship after relationship, always being the scapegoat? If that's the case, you're going to want to watch this video. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can stop the cycle of being the scapegoat in every relationship. First, let's talk about where that phrase came from. The phrase scapegoat goes way back to Bible times on the Day of Atonement, when the priest would take 2 goats, sacrifice one to God for his own sins, and then the other goat, he would confess the sins of the whole nation, release it, and that goat carried away with it the sins of the people. Well, in toxic families, someone is selected to carry the sins or imperfections or problems of everyone in the family. And that's where the term scapegoat comes from. Toxic people, especially people that might be high on the narcissist scale, the malignant narcissism scale, they are very disconnected from who they really are. They're very disconnected from the qualities that they really possess because they live their life through this false image of perfection. They're so in need of that false image being who they really are that they don't even allow themselves to feel selfish, to feel angry, to feel competitive, to feel unreasonable. Now, if you think about it, everything I mentioned there is normal behavior. Normal people get angry. Normal people get unreasonable at times. Normal people feel selfish at times. But the toxic person is so in need of their perfect false image to be perfect. They deny themselves the reality of being imperfect. It's what we all are. So the truth is that they do have those feelings. They do come up inside of them, but since their reality doesn't allow them to own it and to admit it, what they do is they project it onto the scapegoat of the family. So if they see the scapegoat doing something for themselves that makes them happy, even a child playing with their toys, the malignant narcissist won't be happy about that because everyone should be doing and thinking for the malignant narcissist. So when they see that happening, they'll say something to the child like, "You're being so selfish. You know, you're only thinking of yourself. There are things that you need to do for me." Making that child feel as if doing for themselves is wrong. Because they view their children as extensions of themselves, they expect their children to live, breathe, think, and feel whatever suits them. Not the child, whatever suits them. When you're a child and you're put in the role of a scapegoat, you didn't have a choice. It wasn't because there was something wrong with you. Normally, the parent picks as the scapegoated child the child that is more empathic, a child where they can see everything that they're not. They see that child really experiencing happiness. They know they don't. So that's something that's a negative in their eyes. They see the child speak up and say, "Hey, mommy, daddy, that hurts me," or "That's mean." And they think, "You can't speak up. You know, you can't ever go against what I'm doing. You can't ever view what I'm doing as anything less than perfect." And that puts a mark on that child. There is nothing wrong with that child. That child is simply authentic, intuitive, empathic, everything the narcissist isn't and doesn't like. And so they put that child in that role. And now every time there's a fight, every time something happens in the family, somehow it's the child's fault. And malignant narcissists are expert manipulators. They can spin it. I remember a psychologist told me once, he said, "Michele, narcissists are such good manipulators that they can convince you that this white wall to my left is actually yellow. And they will be so convincing that by the time you're done with the conversation, you'll be doubting your perception as to what color you're actually seeing, because that's how good they are." Imagine being a child up against an expert manipulator that is constantly making them feel bad for anything and everything, not only that they do, but anything and everything that the toxic person feels that doesn't want to feel and then puts it in that child. It's an awful place to be. So what the child does at that time is, because their life depends on their caregiver, they will do anything and everything to try to make that caregiver happy, even if it's unreasonable, even if it doesn't make sense. So if their caregiver gets mad at them for emoting, they will stop feeling. If their caregiver gets mad at them whenever they do for themselves, whenever they are engaging in self-care or self-love, they will divorce that piece of themselves in an effort to try to make that person happy. So they're fragmenting themselves. They're not doing anything to make that person get angry. Of course, it doesn't work. And so you're literally just chopping the pieces of yourself up and putting them in the shadow, trying to make peace with that caregiver. And basically what the child is doing is chasing after the formula, the secret formula of making that parent happy. Because the toxic parent is never happy, and then even that becomes the child's fault, as if it's their fault for not knowing exactly what makes that parent happy. So the child is trying harder and harder, yanking themselves out, eliminating pieces of themselves, their authentic self, that the parent doesn't like, in an effort to try to get the love that they deserve. That's an awful place to be as a child. The problem with that is a scapegoated child often becomes scapegoated in adult relationships. They wind up being the one that can never make their partner happy. At least their partner tells them that, right? They're to blame for all of the problems. They never seem to be able to have reciprocal relationships. They always seem to get people that treat them like the scapegoat, which is what happened to them in their childhood. It's like their parents set up a template, and now they're just following it through, and everyone else seems to get it and seems to treat that child that same way as well, or that adult child the same way as well. Guess what? It's not true. Once a scapegoat, always a scapegoat? No, no. You can break free of this pattern, because that's what it is. It's a pattern. It was a coping skill. It now has become your template for relationships, but it's not working. And you have the power to break out of it in romantic relationships, with your family, and with your friends. And I'm going to give you tips that can help. So I'm going to talk about 4 reasons why people wind up staying in that scapegoated role, and then we're going to pick them apart and help you to break out of that mold. Okay, so the 4 reasons: fear of abandonment, 2, feeling responsible for the feelings of others, 3, inability to be assertive, and 4, emotional flashbacks. All right, so let's pick those apart, okay? So when it comes to abandonment, fear of abandonment, that started because as a child, you were abandoned anytime you were yourself, or anytime you were doing, feeling, thinking, or being anything that the toxic person didn't want you to do, or be, or feel. Anytime that happened, they got angry at you. They made you feel unloved. They made you feel bad. So they abandoned you emotionally. And then as a coping skill, in an effort to try to gain back that love, which a child should never feel like they have to earn, right? They're your child, you should love them just because they are. But toxic parents make the child feel like they have to earn it, they have to gain it back. It's something they did wrong. So what children do as a coping skill is they abandon themselves. So if you got in trouble for emoting, right, and your parent got angry, or stopped talking to you, or gave you this look of contempt that sent fear through your body, you learned to stop having emotions. You stopped feeling as if there was an on-off switch. You turned it off. In that sense, rather than feeling their abandonment, the coping skill was, by abandoning yourself, you didn't have to feel their abandonment. So in a relationship, a person becomes a scapegoat because rather than being their authentic self, rather than being who they really are, they abandon themselves for what the other person wants all the time. Because they're afraid. They're afraid if they say no. They're afraid if they say that they have a different perspective, that that person is going to abandon them. The problem is that fear attracts toxic people that keep you in that scapegoated role. So in order to overcome that, learning to strengthen your self-identity, learning to be able to be you, even if other people get upset, even if they think your joke was stupid, even if they think you're ridiculous, but you're you. When you're able to no longer abandon yourself, then there's an inner strength that repels toxic people. It breaks you out of that scapegoating role where you now become an equal with that person. I know somebody said one time to me in a coaching session, if my family doesn't get upset and angry with me, then I feel good when I make decisions. I can make decisions as long as they're happy. But that's not reality. No one's always happy all the time with everything somebody else does. We can't expect somebody to not be disappointed at times, to not be upset, to not be cranky, to not be angry. We have to be strong enough within ourselves to know that it's okay for them to have those feelings. I don't have to abandon my viewpoint. I don't have to abandon my decisions. Each person in the relationship just has to compromise and find that happy medium. But there should never be one person having it all their way and the other person never having it their way because of fear of abandonment, because that will keep you in the scapegoated role. When it comes to thinking that you are responsible for the feelings of someone else. So obviously we have a play in how our family feels, right? If we're mean, obviously they're going to feel bad. If we treat somebody with a lack of love, they're going to be hurt. So I'm not saying that we don't have any responsibility. But there are times when your family member is feeling something that has nothing to do with you. There's no need to feel guilty for whatever they're feeling. Now that comes from childhood. If your parent was angry, it was because they made you think there was something you did wrong. It was your fault that they were angry. And when that pattern's repeated over and over, we grow up and we're in relationships and somebody's angry, could have nothing to do with you, but you take the blame as if it does, and then you make it your responsibility to make sure that person is never angry, combining it with the self-abandoning. So abandoning things that are important to you in an effort to make them happy, and you just wind up with a very unbalanced relationship with one person getting it all and one person pouring it all out and getting nothing in return, which will keep you in that scapegoated role. Something that's really powerful to overcome that feeling that somebody's responsible, that you're responsible for somebody's feelings, is to recognize that people are allowed to have feelings. People are allowed to be angry. They're allowed to be disappointed. They're allowed to be upset. It's not your job in life to make sure that a person never ever feels that way. Now, obviously you don't want to provoke that in them, but if they choose those feelings for whatever reason, they're allowed. And you're still allowed to know that you're okay, that you're a good person, that you are not to blame because somebody chose to handle something in an angry or disappointed way. When you're raised in toxic households, there are no, he's allowed to think this way and she's allowed to think that way. Everyone has to think just like the toxic person. There are no different perspectives. There's only one perspective. So as an adult, it's hard to grasp that in the beginning, to realize, oh, wait a second. God, that makes so much sense. If she's mad and she's in a bad mood, that's okay. I'm here for you if you need me, but there's no reason to make it like it's your fault. Because if we do that, even if you're in a healthy relationship with somebody, you can accidentally train somebody to treat you in a toxic way by putting these behaviors into practice. Little by little, that person will learn, oh, they'll always abandon themselves. They'll always let me have my way. Oh, if I'm angry, he'll make it his fault or her fault. And done over a long period of time, they automatically associate their own anger with something that you've done. So that's why it's so important to break out of these patterns. Regarding an inability to be assertive. As a child, you are not allowed to be assertive. Assertiveness, your brain associates with pain and misery, because whenever you were assertive as a child, you were probably insulted or disciplined or ignored for a long period of time or treated disdainfully. So when that's done over a long period of time, our brain gets conditioned. Again, we get conditioned to associate two things together. Assertiveness punishment, bad, rejection, and it becomes an association. So as an adult, if we're in relationships and we want to be assertive and we want to say no to something and we want to put boundaries down and we want to express how we really feel, but we're afraid because our mind is going back to the past, then we're not going to be assertive. If you're not assertive, then you're never able to add your perspective to the equation. And in every relationship, it's two people. There are always two perspectives. One person is not always right. So sometimes we have to be assertive and we have to explain, we have to show a different perspective. We have to say no, we have to disagree. If we're never able to do that, then we won't be able to break out of that scapegoated role. And that kind of leads me to the last one, the last reason why people stay in the role of a scapegoat. And this is the hardest one to break. But it's not impossible, and once you really understand how to do it and once you start practicing, it becomes easier and easier. But it has to do with emotional flashbacks. When we hear of the word flashback, we think of a visual component. We think of a memory vividly flashing before our eyes. But that's not what an emotional flashback is. An emotional flashback has no visual component. So it's not like you're thinking of a specific time. It's just a familiar emotion that comes up in similar circumstances. So everything I just mentioned will provoke an emotional flashback in an adult child of a toxic parent. So let's say you don't want to abandon yourself and you want to say that you prefer to go here instead of there. At the moment that you want to say your preference, you'll get this feeling inside, this overly intense, almost emotionally crippling feeling that won't allow you to speak your mind. Same thing with being assertive. You'll want to be assertive. Your brain will know, I should be assertive. This is good for me, this is good for the family, but that emotional flashback will kick on and you'll feel the feeling, the emotional flashback that will not allow you to be assertive. So what do you do? We can't go through life expecting other people to not put us in a position to have an emotional flashback. In other words, never get upset, never disagree, never feel disappointed. That's not reasonable and that's not even healthy, and it's not going to help you to heal. So the way to heal is to work through the emotional flashback, not around, not ignoring, not having the other person not cause the emotional flashback, but us learning how to work through them. So how do you do it? That topic alone is enough for a video itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video specifically on how to overcome emotional flashbacks. So if you want to learn how to overcome emotional flashbacks, make sure that you subscribe and hit that bell icon if you're new to my channel, because I'm constantly putting up videos that will help you to heal and overcome subconscious programming.